But make no bones about it, the case, various laws have been passed by New Labour since they came in 97. There's probably been 8 through 10 acts which deal with militant equality of various sorts. There's a degree to which anyone who speaks in public or semi-public in relation to this meeting now has to make sure that anything they say is well within the remit of all the laws that have been passed. This is why the language that people use is, in my case anyway, is abstract to a degree, and it has to be. The point of these laws is to prevent people speaking emotionally or from the heart rather than in any philosophical or an abstract or an intellectual or in a semi-intellectual way. Freedom of speech to intellectuals who have liberal opinions has been allowed. The point of these laws is to prevent, particularly but not exclusively, indigenous working class people from saying the truth as they see it about the way in which the country's changed around them in the last 40 to 50 years. This is why these laws have been introduced. The laws that created the Race Relations Board, the laws that portended the creation of the Commission for Racial Equality and its attendant Commission for Sexual Equality, and this new hyper-ministry led by Phillips. In the old days, white elitist liberals used to lead these organisations. Lords and liberal peers, usually executive members of the Liberal Party, as it then was. Now, after Ouseley, we have Phillips, and Phillips is under pressure because the British National Party has risen. Ouseley, who was of course chairman of this commission, or the CRE that preceded it before Phillips, criticises Phillips because the British National Party has won elections, as if his remit is actually to stop one particular political party in the country. Phillips's remit is to impose equality in relation to alleged oppression and or quote-unquote discrimination in all areas of the society. But one of his prime textual down-in-the-basement targets is to make sure that parties that stand for a different set of values, such as prior patriotism, don't get anywhere. Margaret Thatcher and Michael Portillo in the late 1980s did actually have a few internal governmental policy papers about abolishing these quangos, which are anti-white, and anti-British, and anti-English, and anti-Welsh, and anti-Ulster-Irish, and anti-post-Irish in Britain, and anti-Scottish, and anti-white proletarian, and anti-bourgeois, and anti-heterosexual, and anti-disabled. You see, these are quite discriminatory bodies, even though they say that they're for love and justice and inclusion and tolerance, and they love everybody to death, and they dislike nobody at all. But if you actually look at them in a different way, and you cast the ideology that comes out of Phillips' bureaucracy in a different light, you realise that they have groups to which they're antagonistic, they have individuals drawn from those groups to which they're even more antagonistic, and they wish to deny such persons freedom of speech. Now, earlier in the 20th century, our fathers and grandfathers were told that they fought. They fought against Germany, they fought against fascism, they fought against Imperial Germany in the First War between 1914 and 18. You may have seen some of the very elderly veterans who are basically dying now, 93, 89, 96, 109, 106, 104. As these men went over the top in 1914-18, in Flanders Fields, at the Somme, at Passchendaele, at Ypres and elsewhere, were they fighting for tolerance and inclusion? Were they fighting for Mr. Phillips to impose his bureaucratic remit upon future generations of this country? When men got out of their tanks and fried an egg on the side of it in the North African desert in the Second War, were they fighting for tolerance and inclusion? Were they fighting for Mr. Phillips to impose laws upon them here in the north of England and elsewhere to describe what they can say, even in private, even in a text message between friends, even in an office in the public or in the private sector? No, they weren't fighting for tolerance and inclusion. They were fighting for glory. They were fighting for this country. They were fighting for England and Britain. They were fighting for what their old rulers had told them about what the future would be like if they lost. They were fighting for a degree of racial and ethnic pride that was unstated because the whole English conspectus, which you didn't really go on about that because it was accepted as a norm to begin with, and therefore you didn't need to illustrate it too much because it was a given before you even started. They were fighting for the flags that were behind them. And many more maimed and injured on top of that core 800,000. And that's just in the First War. What did they die for? Did they die for a multicultural Britain? Did they die for a multi-ethnic Britain? Did they die for a politically correct Britain? Did they die for 200,000 abortions a year? Did they die for the absence of the death penalty? Did they die for liberal left censorship that denies the rights even of a private conversation up to a certain perspective? Did they die for the right of men to marry each other and adopt children? Did they die for all of these things? Or did they actually fight for something different? I hazard the guess that they actually fought for a society that we had a proportion of, but which has now been dipped down to such a degree that even to mention it is incorrect, is transgressive, is anti-system, is mentally criminal, or treated largely as such.